Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're demystifying a 500-year-old text to reveal what is arguably the ultimate, timeless playbook for modern leadership. We're zeroing in on Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, specifically Chapter 20, to completely unpack the hidden architecture of authority. Written back in Renaissance Italy, it's wild how perfectly this text decodes today's corporate boardrooms, political arenas, and digital landscapes. So whether you're leading a team, trying to build a startup brand, or just wanting to understand the complex power dynamics humming along all around you, we're going to see exactly how influence is built, maintained, and perceived in the most high-stakes environments imaginable.
Have you ever wondered why we naturally respect some leaders while just completely dismissing others? Seriously, when you look around at high-profile politicians, Fortune 500 CEOs, or even just leaders in your local community, you might assume the ones we instinctively follow just have some magical charisma. Like they were born with a mysterious, unteachable aura, right? Well, the source material reveals something completely different. And frankly, it's much more fascinating. There's no magic involved at all. It's actually a highly engineered system of inputs and outputs. It's a structural architecture that literally anyone can learn, deconstruct, and strategically apply.
And that brings us to our core concept, prestige engineering. Now, usually when we hear the name Machiavelli, our minds jump straight to poison, daggers, fear, and ruthless coercion. But here, he shifts our focus entirely towards psychological architecture. Prestige engineering is the active, intentional construction of an elevated, purposeful image. It's all about manufacturing durable authority perception through visible competence, absolute decisiveness, and strategic signaling. So it's not about mere survival. It's about deliberately elevating yourself beyond normal social comparison, making your leadership an unquestioned reality.
Now, here is a really crucial distinction you have to keep in mind. Respect does not equal admiration. In Machiavelli's model, respect is defined strictly as perceived strategic weight. Generating this kind of systemic respect doesn't actually require you to be universally loved, remarkably kind, or even entirely moral. Think about a turnaround CEO who steps into a failing company and has to make the brutal call to lay off 20% of the workforce. Obviously, they aren't admired in that moment, but if their decisions are visible, strategic, and entirely consequential to saving the business, they command immense respect. Your decisions just have to seem coherent, and your leadership must appear incredibly difficult to manipulate or challenge.
This dynamic plays out completely differently depending on who is actually watching you. The game of authority operates on 3 distinct levels, simply because different groups have entirely different incentives. Take the general population. They're actively seeking symbols of strength and certainty, instinctively equating visible competence with safety. The elites, on the other hand, they align themselves with perceived strategic success. They're basically chasing momentum, wanting to back a guaranteed winner to secure their own positions. And your rivals? Well, your rivals are endlessly probing you. They're constantly looking for any microscopic sign of hesitation or indecision to exploit for their own gain.
What's truly wild about Machiavelli's observations is how flawlessly they map onto modern human psychology. Think of this as the psychological underlayer of status. First up, we've got competence projection bias. This is that halo effect where we automatically infer universal competence from just a few bold, visible actions. Second is narrative hero construction. This is where a leader's massive symbolic achievements create this mythic perception of authority that becomes totally self-sustaining. And finally, the anti-weakness instinct. Kind of like sharks smelling blood in the water, we instinctively and rapidly downgrade leaders who look passive, hesitant, or reactive. We are biologically wired to follow confident action.
These psychological traits build into an undeniable, systemic dynamic, essentially the physics of leadership. We're looking at 2 contrasting feedback loops here. The first is the prestige loop. Decisive action leads to reputation growth, which creates this aura of deterrence against your rivals, and ultimately grants you even more strategic freedom to act again. It's an incredibly powerful upward spiral. Conversely, we have the fatal weakness loop. Hesitation creates an immediate perception of vulnerability, which triggers elite opportunism and causes deep, irreversible legitimacy erosion. Every single leader, right now, is currently caught in one of these 2 loops.
You have to realize that under adversarial conditions, the perception of strategic competence matters more than morality, popularity, or ideological purity. When the pressure is truly on and a system is facing a severe existential threat, human beings naturally attach authority to the actors who appear capable of shaping reality, rather than those who are just passively reacting to it. Imagine an airline flight going through a massive, terrifying storm. In that crisis moment, the passengers absolutely do not care if the pilot is the nicest person in the world or if they have the right ideological purity. They just want the person who projects absolute control over that aircraft.
Of course, if we know how authority is built, we also know exactly how it's dismantled. By reverse engineering Machiavelli's failure conditions, we get this incredibly tactical playbook for how established systems actually collapse. If you want to weaken a respected system, you don't attack their strengths directly. No, first you expose their strategic inconsistency. Once they're slightly off balance, you force them into reactive behavior. You make them play your game. This completely destroys their carefully crafted competence narratives and creates visible failure events that violently interrupt their symbolic momentum. Once a leader looks incapable of directing events, the system around them rapidly collapses.
Now, we absolutely have to balance this with a ruthless modern critique. Because, let's be real, this strategic model definitely has its limitations. An image without actual operational substance is going to collapse eventually. Machiavelli sometimes overemphasizes the power of image and underestimates the severe risks of performative overreach. We see this all the time today with heavily hyped startups that launch with incredible marketing and a visionary CEO, but absolutely zero underlying technology. If you manufacture a bold, decisive image, but entirely lack the institutional durability to back it up, it's a massive blind spot. When the illusion is finally tested, the exposure risk is catastrophic failure.
However, there's a fascinating modern extension to this in today's digital landscape. In our hyper-networked media systems, symbolic authority can scale globally, so much faster than actual material capability. We know that perception often shapes outcomes, long before objective reality even catches up. This creates what we call narrative-induced reality effects. Consider a viral internet personality or a meme stock movement, where perceived power and momentum actually generate millions of dollars in real-world financial backing. People act based on perceived power, which in turn temporarily creates very real, tangible power for modern politicians, influencers, and digital nation-states.
To prove just how universal this principle is, let's step out of the 16th century and rapidly hop between a few high-stakes modern domains. First up, financial trading systems. In the intensely chaotic world of global finance, a respected portfolio manager is one who projects absolute discipline and consistency under extreme volatility. Their visible, unwavering composure is often the only thing holding market confidence and investor capital together during a massive crash. The exact second they show visible hesitation or panic, billions of dollars in confidence can just evaporate. The prestige loop applies flawlessly to the trading floor. Let's switch gears and consider another domain entirely, chess. On the chessboard, the concept of initiative dominance is absolutely everything. When grandmasters play, simply holding the strategic initiative creates an immense psychological pressure that completely reshapes the opponent's behavior, forcing them to constantly play defensively. Active, aggressive positions project control and dominance, often long before any actual mathematical or material advantage even exists on the board. The player with the initiative is actively shaping the reality of the game before the pieces even reflect it.
And you know, this seamlessly translates over to the world of cybersecurity too, tying directly back to that anti-weakness instinct we discussed earlier. Think about a massive data breach. It's the organizations that publicly project rapid, decisive action during a crisis that successfully manufacture deterrence against future threats. If a company goes silent, looks hesitant, or issues confused statements during an incident, it immediately signals severe structural vulnerability to every other threat actor monitoring the situation. Swift, highly coordinated action builds systemic respect and warns attackers to look elsewhere.
Finally, consider the modern startup founder or the CEO of an emerging AI company. In an incredibly chaotic, fast-moving tech market, controlling the narrative and maintaining forward momentum provides disproportionate psychological leverage. Perceived strategic competence is a literal force multiplier, because if venture capitalists, top-tier engineering talent, and your industry competitors all perceive you as the singular force driving the entire industry forward, that illusion of momentum actually generates the funding and human capital you need to make it a reality. You literally speak your power into existence.
Which brings us to our master compression block. This is the dominant pattern, the ultimate takeaway you need to remember from Machiavelli's prestige engineering model. Authority strengthens when people believe the leader controls reality rather than responds to it. It all fundamentally comes down to projecting decisive strategic competence. You absolutely must act as the architect of your environment, never passive, never merely reactive. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to ask yourself a very direct, slightly uncomfortable question. Are you actively shaping your reality or just visibly reacting to it? As you examine your own leadership style, the structure of your organization, and the hidden architecture of power operating all around you every single day, I'll leave you to ponder that vital strategic question. Because ultimately, your authority, your systemic respect, and your strategic freedom all heavily depend on your answer. Keep analyzing those structures around you, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.